News of the times. The murder that stunned Victorian London. The shocking case of Mrs. Millson in 1866. Welcome to News of the Times. Step into the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, where a shocking murder in 1866 sent ripples through society. When Mrs. Millson was found dead under mysterious circumstances, whispers of scandal, betrayal, and cold-blooded calculation spread like wildfire. In this episode, we uncover the dramatic twists of the investigation, the strange behaviour of those closest to her, and the sensational trial that gripped the nation. From dark alleyways to the grandeur of the courtroom, witness a true crime story that stunned even the most hardened Londoners. Was justice truly served, or did the truth vanish into the gaslit shadows? And in today's end of episode further particulars, Victorian London had its fair share of unpleasant aromas, but when the Thames turned into a river of noxious smells, even the politicians fled. Pleasure cruises were cancelled, dinners abandoned, and the air carried a pungent guano bouquet. No one could escape. But before we begin, do give this video a like, subscribe and share. It keeps the perfidious YouTube algorithm from wandering off unsupervised. Left to its own devices, it's rather like a Victorian butler with unfulfilled dreams of the stage, prone to sulking in the pantry unless given regular attention. So, feed it, leash it, and perhaps give it a polite round of applause, and it might just deliver more of our tales straight to you. Now, settle in. The lamps are lit, the tea is poured, and the curtain on this curious case is about to rise. Background. Mrs. Millson. London in the 1860s was a city of sharp contrasts, gaslit streets and horse-drawn traffic, the hum of trade and gossip in the markets, and the cool stone facades of respectable buildings set beside crooked alleys where danger was never far. Mrs. Millson was a figure of quiet respectability, the sort whose presence lent a neighbourhood an air of order. Widowed some years earlier, her late husband had worked for the same company where she now served as housekeeper, a trusted post she carried out with the reserve expected of a Victorian gentlewoman. Her life was modest but comfortable, yet whispers later suggested she had borrowed between £20 and £30, a sizable sum in the 1860s. Whether it was a simple necessity or something more pressing, the debt would later cast a lingering shadow over her story. William Smith was 22 years old at the time of his arrest, described as short, stout, and of dark complexion. He had previously been employed in the hat-making trade. By 1866, however, his work in that line had ceased, and little is recorded of his more recent occupations or personal history. What is known is that Smith lodged in various parts of London and had a circle of acquaintances that included men in regular work, among them a friend who was employed by the same firm where Mrs. Millson served as a housekeeper. It was through such connections that his name would, in time, be linked to one of the most shocking murders in the capital's recent memory. London, April 1866. In the heart of the city, just steps from Cannon Street, a respectable housekeeper lay dead in her employee's doorway, her skull fractured, her blood staining the stone. The victim, Mrs. Sarah Millson, long trusted housekeeper in the services of Messrs. Bevington. What followed was a case that gripped Victorian London, a brutal killing in the city's commercial centre. A suspect with a shifting name and testimony from witnesses who swore they saw him fleeing the scene. The trial would reveal contradictions, coincidences, and one very public question. Was William Smith, otherwise known as Denton, the murderer? From the Sheffield Daily Telegraph, the 30th of April, 1866. Shocking murder in London. A dreadful and fearful murder was perpetrated late on Wednesday night at the warehouse of Messrs. Bevington and Sons, leather sellers, at number 1 Cannon Street, in the city near Badge Row. The unhappy victim being the housekeeper named Sarah Millson, aged 50. The facts, as far as can at present be elicited, are as follows. The housekeeper has been in Messrs. Bevington's service upwards of 10 years. She was a widow. Her husband had been dead some years, having died in the service of the firm. None of Mr. Bevington's family slept in the house, which at night was left in the charge of the housekeeper and the cook, a female named Eliza Lowes. No other domestic slept there. It appears that Mrs. Millson and the cook never quitted the place during Wednesday evening. They sat together in the kitchen, which is on the second floor, up to 9 o'clock, when the warehouse doorbell rang. The cook rose to answer it, but Mrs. Millson stopped her, saying, "No, it's for me. I know who it is." She then proceeded downstairs without a candle, and that was the last she saw of her alive. Last evening she had been longer than usual, being away for an hour and a half, which excited the cook's surprise. At length she went to the top of the stairs and called her name several times without receiving any answer, which induced her to go down. On reaching the bottom of the stairs, she was startled by discovering Mrs. Millson lying on her back in the passage with her face covered with blood. Dr. May arrived quickly and at once detected that the woman had been murdered, her head being beaten by some formidable instrument, apparently a small iron crowbar, such as used by packers in wrenching up nails from packing cases. The appearance of the poor creature's head was frightful. There were no fewer than 7 fearful wounds on the side of her head and neck. Some were like scars, others were lacerated with pieces of the scalp and hair torn from the head, while the skull was evidently terribly fractured and beaten in on the brain. There was no indication the passage of a struggle having taken place. It is clear that the murderer had been inside the house, and from the position the body was found, it seemed that she had her back to him, possibly with an intention to return upstairs when she met with her shocking fate. The cook never heard any scream or groan from her. The poor creature was quite warm, showing clearly that the deed had not long been committed. The murderer having made his exit by the door, the cook found it closed on the latch, but the chain was down. The police thoroughly searched through the warehouse to trace out if the place had been plundered, but they found everything intact as it had been left by the firm's employees when the place was closed in the evening. On the affair being reported to the chief of the city police, a staff of detectives were at once directed to pursue every possible inquiry in order to lead to the apprehension of the murderer. At first there was nothing. No footprints, no weapon, not even a single scrap to name the killer. But in the dead woman's papers, the police uncovered a curious letter. George Terry, It carried no date, no proper address, just a false lead scratched onto the back. From that scrap of paper, the city detectives began to work, tracing an old employee through workhouses and back alleys and drawing out his story one guarded detail at a time. And it was this man, Terry, who would ultimately lead them to the young suspect now in custody. From the Evening Mail, the 20th of April, 1866, the murder in Cannon Street. Shortly after William Smith, who stands charged on suspicion with the murder of Sarah Millson, the housekeeper of Messrs. Bevington, had undergone examination at the Justice Room of the Mansion House on Wednesday, he was placed among 14 other men and passed with them along a corridor below the court in which a young woman had been previously stationed. As they passed before her, she selected the prisoner from among the whole number. She, the witness, is a housekeeper at a house adjoining that of Messrs. Bevington, and at about 10 o'clock on the night of the murder she had gone out upon an errand. On her return, in less than a quarter of an hour afterwards, and as she was entering her master's door, she heard Mrs. Bevington's front door slammed violently and saw a man leave their premises by it. The circumstances of a man leaving at that hour struck her as unusual, and she mentioned it to a fellow servant when she entered the house. Looking at a clock as she did so, it was then 10:15. This is exactly the time at which Messrs. Bevington's cook, concerned at the prolonged absence of the deceased, went downstairs to learn the cause of it and found her dead and the body still warm. The circumstances which led to the prisoner's arrest are curious and reflect credit on the zeal and astuteness of those of the city police who were employed in that matter. The morning after the murder, detectives searching Mrs. Millson's papers uncovered a letter signed George Terry. The name was not new to Messrs. Bevington. Terry had once worked at their Bermondsey Mills alongside both Mrs. Millson and her late husband, but the firm had lost track of him years earlier. Police inquiries revealed that after leaving their employ, Terry had fallen on hard times, eventually ending up in a workhouse. In little more than 12 hours after the murder, Inspector Hamilton and Sergeant Moss of the City Detective Police found him there. At that moment, he was unlikely to have heard of the crime. News of it had not spread until later that evening. They did not at first show him the letter or explain their purpose. Indeed, early on, they even considered that he might be directly involved. When finally confronted with the letter, Terry explained that before his time in the workhouse, he had befriended a young man at a public house known for its evening singing entertainments. They later lodged together in Kent Street in the Borough. During their acquaintance, Terry confided that he had once arranged a loan of about £30 for Mrs. Millson, money she had never repaid. The young man, whose name Terry did not know at that time, offered to recover it for him. Once told of the murder, Terry gave further details and accompanied police to Eton, directly aiding in the arrest of the suspect now in custody. What had seemed an impossible case, no footprints, no weapon, no trace, had, by this one slender clue, been pushed forward in under a week to a man the police believed is worth charging. In the end, the police ruled Terry out. Yes, he had behaved badly, pressing Mrs. Millson for money he had no right to, and even sending Smith to harass her, but the facts cleared him of murder. At the time of the crime, Terry was confined to the workhouse at night, a rule the master and porter confirmed he had not broken. His statements to detectives only strengthened this alibi. For the Evening Mail, the 23rd of April, 1866. The murder in Cannon Street. With respect to the man Terry, through whose assistance the prisoner Smith was apprehended at Eton. Although he appears to have played a very nefarious part in demanding money from the deceased to which he was not entitled, and in employing the prisoner to dun her, no suspicion, in the opinion of the police, attaches to him in reference to the murder, not even as an accomplice or abettor in any way, though on the discovery of the threatening letter bearing his name, they did at first suspect him. His communications with them, however, have been such as entirely to disarm suspicion, and if it had been otherwise, the fact he was an inmate of the workhouse at the time of the murder, and as such absolutely prohibited him from leaving it at night, and it would prove beyond question that he could have had no actual hand in it. The master of the workhouse and the porter state that he was never absent from it on the night of the murder. As for Smith, his face was known in Windsor and Eton, his inflamed eyes an unmistakable marker. His working life was a patchwork of short-lived employments, each lost to drink or petty dishonesty. In 1859 he was dismissed from the Windsor swimming baths for abuse. By August the previous year, a summons for drunkenness and disorderly conduct at Eton was added to his record. When he failed to appear and a fine or a month's hard labour was imposed, he absconded to London, where he fell in with George Terry, and through him made the acquaintance of Mrs. Millson. The inquest. At the inquest, the jury heard from Elizabeth Lowes, the cook who discovered Mrs. Millson lying lifeless in the passage. Her account remained unchanged. The unanswered call to her mistress, the sight of the body, and the hurried summons for a constable. Mrs. Arabella Robbins also repeated her earlier description of a man leaving Messrs. Bevington's door on the night of the murder. A hurried departure, a sidelong glance, and the impression of someone fastening his coat at the throat. The police identification process, too, was revisited. A line of men passed twice before her, the suspect among them. Although she could not claim certainty from a full face, she told the coroner she felt no real doubt in her own mind. From the Evening Mail, the 27th of April, 1866. The murder in Cannon Street. The investigation, as on the former occasion, excited very great interest, and the room in which it was held was crowded. The Messrs. Bevington, to whom the deceased woman had acted as housekeeper for about 10 years at their premises in Cannon Street, were present. The man, William Smith, now in custody on suspicion of murdering the deceased, was not present, but Mr. Scarfe, a solicitor of Welbeck Street, Cavendish Square, attended on his behalf and applied for permission to cross-examine the witnesses. The coroner decided not to allow him. He added that his opportunity would be at the Mansion House, when next the man in custody was taken there for further examination. Police Inspector Shelford testified that in searching Mrs. Millson's effects, a letter was found, first thought to have been written by a man named Terry, but later admitted by the prisoner Smith to be in his own hand. Police Inspector Shelford was called and stated that both on the night of the murder and the day after he searched the deceased's boxes. He saw Mr. Smith, cashier to the firm, take a letter from her desk. This letter, which the witness produced, was the threatening letter produced at the Mansion House on Wednesday last, purporting to have been written by Terry and addressed to Mrs. Millson, but which the man now in custody has admitted to Sergeant Moss to be in his handwriting. Although police suspicions had been heightened by the discovery of William Smith's clothing, any hopes of proving the presence of blood upon them were soon dashed. The analyst, Dr. Leatherby, reported no trace, although only after a most minute examination, a process he considered sufficient to justify the police's original concerns. Yet, if no stains could be proved, there remained other shadows. Two separate witnesses, one a domestic servant, the other a warehouseman, swore they had seen Smith within the premises of Messrs. Bevington and Co. on earlier occasions, sometimes at night, sometimes in daylight, always in places where a stranger had no clear business to be. Catherine Collins, servant to the witness, Mrs. Robbins, saw the man Smith at the Mansion House last Wednesday. She recollected having seen him about 2 months ago come out of Bevington's in the evening sometime after 9 o'clock. She saw him twice at night, and somebody inside shut the door after him. William Bettison, warehouseman to Messrs. Bevington, recognised Smith as a man he had seen at Messrs. Bevington 3 months before, at the top of the stairs on the second floor. He, Smith, was alone. He, Smith, asked either for the housekeeper or Mrs. Millson. Seeing a stranger on that floor who was not a customer, witness Bettison took more notice of him than he ordinarily would have done. In the earlier testimony, they had left any doubt as to William Smith's acquaintance with the murdered woman. George Terry's account sought to remove it. From the confines of St. Olaf's Union Workhouse, Terry described his first meeting with Bill, or as others knew him, Sore-eyed Bill, and the short tangled friendship that followed. Shared lodgings in Dempsey Street, drinks in public houses, and casual talk of money owed and money expected. It was Terry who, by his own admission, led Smith to the back door of Messrs. Bevington and Co., hoping to retrieve a debt owed by Mrs. Millson. The errand, he claimed, ended not with repayment, but with repeated visits, a drunken detour, and unexpected familiarity between Smith and the Bevington premises. George Terry, inmate of St. Olaf's Union Workhouse, said he had known Mrs. Millson when living next door to her in West Street, Neckington, before her husband's death. He first met the prisoner at about 5 or 6 months ago, knowing him only as Bill, others calling him Sore-eyed Bill. They lodged at the same address in Dempsey Street in adjoining beds. Terry told him of money lent to Mrs. Millson. Smith offered to manage that and was shown the back entrance to Messrs. Bevington's, going inside before Christmas. On his return, he said she was engaged and told him to leave it to him, arranging to return the following Wednesday. Afterwards, they went to the Salmon public house, where Smith became very drunk. The original loan had been about £25, value approximately £4,000 in 2025. Mrs. C. May, surgeon, told the inquest that Mrs. Millson's death had not come from the fractured skull alone. The greater injury lay hidden, a heavy effusion of blood on the right side of the brain, the direct result of extreme violence. The breadth of the fracture, he said, left no doubt. It had been inflicted with great force and by a weapon. With the inquest testimony concluded, the Lord Mayor ordered that William Smith remain in custody until the following Friday. By evening he was taken to Newgate Prison in the van, the charge of murder against him bound for trial at the Old Bailey. By the close of the inquest, the Crown's case had taken shape. Witnesses placed Smith at Mrs. Bevington's before and after the killing. His association with George Terry tied him to the victim. The threatening letter found in Mrs. Millson's desk was in his own hand. Even without the telltale trace of blood on his clothing, the prosecution leaned on circumstance, presence, acquaintance, and opportunity. And so, with the coroner's work done, the matter passed to the higher court, where the trial of William Smith would now begin. From the Evening Mail, the 15th of June, 1866, the murder in Cannon Street. Yesterday morning, the trial of William Smith, otherwise Denton, for the murder of Sarah Millson, the housekeeper of Messrs. Bevington, on the night of the 11th of April last, was resumed at the Central Criminal Court before Mr. Baron Bramwell. The case for the prosecution had closed on the previous evening, and the whole of yesterday was occupied with the defence. Henry Harris, a young hatter from Eton, was the first to speak for the defence. The prisoner, he said, had worked for his father's shop throughout the week of the murder, including the Wednesday in question, when they left together at 7:15 in the evening. Smith told him he was heading towards Slough to meet a woman. Harris went home to wash, then met him again about an hour later in Eaton Square. The two, joined by friends Henry Coston and John Matthews, went for a walk, later stopping at Wheeler's beer shop to play cards. He was certain of the date, fixed in his mind by a lottery the previous evening and by a farewell to a family friend on the Wednesday morning. John Harris, father of the previous witness, said he had frequently employed the prisoner. He saw an account of the murder on the following morning. The prisoner was at work with him on the day of the murder and on the previous one. On the Wednesday which the murder was committed, the prisoner left off work between 6:30 and 7:15. Witness was a member of the Loyal Etonian Lodge, and there had been a special visit to Burnham Lodge on the Tuesday, which he attended. He and his son saw Mrs. Butler, who had been staying at their house, off on the Wednesday morning. After the murder, in conversation he had with Clark, a policeman, the latter said he saw the prisoner on the night of the murder coming over Windsor Bridge at about 10 minutes past 11, and was sure it was not 11:15. Sergeant Ballantyne rose for the defence, his voice steady but edged with indignation. He reminded the jury that 4 respectable witnesses had placed William Smith in Eton at the very hour the crime was committed in London, an alibi so complete, he said, that no reasonable mind could doubt it. Yet the police, convinced from the first that Smith was guilty, had shaped every detail to fit that belief, even questioning alibi witnesses in a way that might sow doubt where none existed. Such cases, Ballantyne warned, were a public calamity, a man's life placed in jeopardy not because the facts demanded it, but because the machinery of justice could not admit a mistake. The Crown's case rested largely on the fleeting observation of a single stranger. The defence had offered multiple witnesses who knew the man well, whose accounts matched in every way essential, and who had nothing to gain but the truth. If such testimony cannot save a man's life, he told the jury, then no man's life is safe. Mr. Sergeant Ballantyne then proceeded to sum up. He had, he might observe, almost hoped that he should not be called upon to speak again. He had hoped that the prosecution would have seen from the evidence which had that day been given for the prisoner that it was unnecessary to carry the case further. But as this course had not been taken, he was bound to address the jury. There were several persons whose names were known as witnesses for the prosecution who had not been called. One of these was the constable named Pierman, to whom, so it had been related, the evidence given that day had been detailed directly after the prisoner was given into custody. One of the witnesses spoke to a policeman whom he called number 11 and told him that the prisoner was at a place on the Wednesday night at a time when it would have made it impossible for him to have been in London. He believed the police innocently took this man, believing him to be guilty, and they believed it upon the foundation of certain spots on his coat which they thought to be blood-stained. They at once assumed his guilt and made everything to agree with that view, and he charged this against the system pursued, that it was a disgraceful spectacle to see this man put upon his trial when the evidence that day produced was known to the police and was not, as it ought to have been, sifted by higher authorities, and the innocence of the man made apparent without his undergoing the perils of his life. And then evidence such as he had brought forward that day was adduced, where no 1, 2, or 3, but witnesses after witnesses deposed to facts showing that the prisoner could not have been in London on the night of the murder, and as therefore could not have committed this murder, their evidence must be believed. Mr. Baron Bramwell told the jury they must be certain not only that Sarah Millson was murdered, but that William Smith was her killer. The Crown's case rested on Mrs. Robbins' brief sighting outside Bevington's. The theory that Smith could have travelled from Eton to London and back by train, and a letter showing the two were not strangers. The defence answered with multiple witnesses, placing Smith in Eton at the time, contradictions in the railway evidence, and flaws in the identification. If they held any reasonable doubt, Bramwell said, they must acquit. The jury did not retire. Without hesitation, they found Smith not guilty. Leaving the dock, Smith declared himself as innocent as the babe unborn. Bramwell added for the record that the prisoner was more than not guilty, he was innocent. Further particulars. And now for a brief diversion from the grim corridors of crime to a rather more odorous Victorian scandal. The year is a little earlier than our main tale, but still well within the fog and the filth of London life. While murder may shock the senses, it seemed the Thames could offend them in quite another way, one so potent it threatened to cancel pleasure cruises, whitebait dinners, and perhaps polite conversation itself. From the Bell's Weekly Messenger, June 1859, noxious smells from rivers. It is not only the gentlemen who transact public business in Westminster who are suffering, and will soon have to suffer more, though their case is undoubtedly a hard one. We all share in the disadvantage. Those who are compelled to live altogether by the riverside might just as well go to Cayenne or Sierra Leone. The climate would not be much worse, for it has been remarked that fevers, analogous to those which abound in West Africa, are not unknown amongst the inhabitants of London, at least among that portion which dwells along the banks of the river. Nor is it a matter of indifference to the more fortunate class who can pitch their tent at Hampstead or Highgate, or along the green slopes of Sydenham. Those to whom in old times the river was a source of occasional delight, who rejoiced in an aquatic excursion, who looked forward with pleasure to a sail from Richmond or a steam to Greenwich, a road to Kew or a trip to Blackwall, must now renounce the anticipation. Even the ministerial white-bait dinner must be abandoned on account of the guano sauce which, diffused through the air, accompanies the delicacy. Foreigners arriving by the steamers from France or Belgium, from Hamburg or the north, vainly endeavour to close their nostrils against the first invasion of British air, and are inclined to doubt whether Britannia really does rule the seas, since she has so little power over the rivers. The show has ended. The band packed away, and the sun sets gently over the splendid British seaside. If you are not amused, we regret to inform you the scriptwriter has already fled, likely in pursuit of a stick of rock and a good excuse to avoid responsibility. But if you were entertained, perhaps even charmed, then you know what to do, don't you? Like, subscribe and share. Spread the word to your friends, your neighbours, and that mysterious gentleman loitering near the Punch and Judy show. Every click keeps the wheels turning, the tails spinning, and the mighty algorithm from hurling us into digital oblivion. Such small acts keep our house lively, our stories abundant, and the YouTube gods properly buttered up, lest we all sit in silence tomorrow. And for those who want the whole show, more than 600 full-length, ad-free documentaries covering historical true crime, scandal, nostalgia, the occasional atmospheric bedtime story, and stabs at British humour. We have daily uploads waiting for you over on our Patreon link in the description. It's warm, it's welcoming, and it's probably the only place you find this much Victorian murder alongside seaside comedy in one sitting. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, humble chronicler of murderous goings-on and founder of the Halliday Memorial League for the respectful avoidance of public suspicion. Do remember to take your brolly with you. Any items left behind become the property of the establishment and will be quietly picked over by the staff in a manner both respectful and opportunist.